Good morning, everyone. We will start the meeting now. Welcome to the 6th meeting of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, and welcome to our committee members, staff, and members of the public. Today, we are very excited to have a brand new member join us, Howard Wax. Howard, it is wonderful to have you on this particular committee, and we look forward to your contributions and hearing from you today. For those who are following the agenda, you can do so on, and the debate, you can do so on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. The Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee acknowledges the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we're very, very pleased to be here. For those who are following on the screen, you'll see that today's meeting is being captured as well, and we want to thank our real-time captioner, Marlene, who's been joining us at most of our meetings, so thank you very much. And the web link is there. If you have any questions, you can also email matthew.green@toronto.ca to receive the link by email. As we do with all our meetings here at TAC, we begin with a series of introductions for those who are around the inner horseshoe, just to introduce who's in the room and the staff that will be speaking today and supporting our meeting. So my name is Kristen Wong-Tam, City Councillor representing Toronto Centre and also the chair of the TAC committee.
Good morning, I'm Deirdre Boyle. I'm an accessibility consultant with People and Equity.
Good morning, Mark Kim, Project Manager with the Accessibility Unit and People Equity Division. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Miranda Frey. I'm the Site Manager at Next Steps Employment Center Riverdale site that's coordinated by Toronto District School Board.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Batrides. I'm a member of the TAC committee and I work within the developmental services sector.
Good morning. I'm Jason Michel. I'm a TAC committee member and a federal crown prosecutor by day.
Coming this way.
Member of the Accessible Outreach Network.
Morning, everyone. I'm Wendy Porch. I'm a member of the TAC, and I am the Executive Director at the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto.
Good morning, I'm Liv Mendelson. I'm also a member of this committee, and I am Director of Accessibility and Inclusion at the Miles Nadal Jewish Community Center.
Good morning, I'm Bhuvani. I'm a TAC committee member, and my pronouns are she and her.
Good morning, I'm Carol Costin, and I work with the City Clerk's Office, and we provide all your meeting management support for the TAC committee.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Ling. I'm from City Clerk's Office. I support TAC committee.
Good morning, I'm Lynn Genova, and I support this committee, and I think you know this is my favorite one. And I especially the four-legged one that sits with Jason.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Katisha McGregor, and I am with the City Clerk's Office, and I'm very happy to be supporting your committee. Thank you.
Great. Let's go over to this side.
Hi, good morning. My name is Wahida Rahman, and I'm the Director for Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights, and my pronouns are she and her.
Alma Kinton, the City of Toronto's Chief People Officer.
Joseph Salvaggio, Project Manager within the Corporate Real Estate Management Division.
Good morning, Pat Matozo. I'm the Executive Director of the Corporate Real Estate Management Division.
Good morning, Oksana Robertson, Senior Project Manager with the same division.
Good morning, I'm Frank Molinari. I'm the Director of the Project Management Office of Corporate Real Estate Management.
Fantastic. I think we may have some individuals right behind you.
Good morning, Marco Palermo, Director of Enterprise Spatial and Digital Services and Corporate INT.
Good
Good morning, Michael Negro, Project Manager for the city's Digital Accessibility Project.
Good morning, Cornel Vanderspeck. I also work with Michael Negro as the Senior Digital Content Advisor for the Accessibility Project.
Good morning, my name is Mazen Aribi. I'm the 2019 Chair of the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we'll just continue to proceed with the meeting and welcome again everyone. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, thank you. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes of our July 12th and October 11th, 2019 meeting? Bhuvani, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. If I can just bring your attention now to our agenda, we're going to run through the order paper, and we will then adopt the order paper and then proceed. First item is DI 6.1, that's the chair's report. It will be held for a presentation. DI 6.2, employment accessibility at the City of Toronto, will be receiving a presentation from the Director of Strategic Recruitment. We'll be holding that down for presentation. DI 6.3, increasing the accessibility of city facilities, an overview of the corporate real estate management accessibility programs, and we will be holding that down for presentation. DI 6.4, City of Toronto multi-year accessibility plan. This was the big one that we've been waiting for, 2020 to 2025. We'll be receiving a report as well. DI 6.5, TTC Wheel-Trans update on the appeal process and service enhancement. Again, we'll be receiving a presentation. DI 6.6, accessibility underground path system. Once again, we will be receiving a presentation, so we're holding that. Actually, no, we won't be getting a presentation. Does anyone want to hold this item down? Seeing none, we can probably just dispense with it now by moving adoption. Anyone like to move this letter? Okay, Wendy, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. One item done. Good job. And then DI 6.7, International Day for Persons with Disabilities celebration event. There is going to be an update. I think we'll probably need to hold that down. So that brings us to the end of just sort of reviewing the paper. I would like to move that we take item 6.5, which is a TTC Wheel-Trans update on appeal process and service enhancement, and bump that to the top of the agenda. So that'll be the first item that we deal with, because we do have a member of the public who's here to speak to that matter. Are all those in favor of moving that to the top of the agenda? Any opposed? That carries. So we'll deal with that first. We'll deal with that even before the chair's report. And I just want to remind everyone in the room that Victoria is our personal support worker. She is here today. You can. She is the person wearing blue. She's been with us at all our meetings, and she's here to basically take care of any of the needs that any members may have. And just a reminder, don't rush off at the end of the meeting. We do have a catered lunch that's coming in to celebrate this committee's end-of-year work. And so that will probably be arriving around 12. So we can actually proceed. I would like to invite the members from the TTC who actually come to the front of the room. I know you have a presentation for us. So folks, we'll be hearing from Dwayne Geddes, head of TTC Wheel-Trans. Cameron Penman is joining him, manager of customer service. Dean Milton, manager of strategic initiatives, and Loden Hassan, assistant manager, customer service, will provide us an overview of the TTC Wheel-Trans appeal process and service enhancements. This presentation will include information on the appeal process, registration, and the family of services from their door-to-door. So while they're settling in, did everyone have a good Halloween? Yeah? Wet, it was wet. If we travel fast enough to Montreal, we can make it to their Halloween by the end of today, because I understand that they've postponed it because of 80 millimeters of rain, which is, if I were in their position, I think I might do the same, considering I have a 5-month-old at home. Okay, so you're ready? Okay, and you'll have 5 minutes on the clock.
There we go. Can we hear me now? Oh, there we go. Thank you. My name is Dwayne Geddes. I am the head of Wheel-Trans. I'm here just giving a brief update on our Wheel-Trans appeal process and a few service enhancements that are happening at Wheel-Trans. First, we want to talk about the appeal process. There's 3 steps in this process. As you can see over here, we have step 1 of the process is the application being submitted to our team at Wheel-Trans. It's submitted for assessment by our team, and then all of those who submit are fit into one of our categories of unconditional, conditional, or temporary. So that's step 1, submitting an application. Step 2 would be a functional assessment. Functional assessments are done by occupational therapists at Sunnybrook Health Services, and these are scheduled when an eligibility decision cannot be made based on the information provided, or the applicant has indicated that they want to appeal their eligibility decision. An FA functional assessment is completed before interview with the appeal panel. Third step is the appeal panel, and this panel is done through Medisys Canada, and what happens is we have three members on that panel. So we have a transit expert, occupational therapist, and a community member, which is typically a member of our ACAT committee. So this, if the people, our customers who are submitting eligibility, they don't agree with our decision, they can go through this panel, and then another decision is made. So we had a motion. We were asked to come back to talk about this particular motion and review the process for Wheel-Trans appeals for accessibility improvements, including provisions to allow applicants to attend in person by interview, by Skype or Zoom or some other technology. So in response to that motion, what we've said here is that customers must attend a functional assessment. In order for them to be assessed, it has to be done in person. However, for appeal panel, what we are doing is we're looking at the feasibility of allowing applicants to the option to participate remotely. We already have some initial concerns, and we want to be able to have more discussions about this with our ACAT committee and other members of the public. Initial concerns from our ACAT committee is that they see value in seeing the customer, their movements, their body language, as well as our vendor who also does these appeal meetings. They also had concerns with lighting and technology. So it's something that we will be looking into, but we will take some very hard looks at it through our ACAT committee and other consultations. Just a brief update on our family of services. Family of services is essentially a trip that involves one of our conventional services, so Wheel-Trans plus bus, streetcar, subway. Family of services has been expanding to 42 routes, 270 specifically selected stops, and 45 accessible bus stations. So we're very excited about our family of services initiative that continues to roll along. Conditional trip matching is about booking a trip based on one's conditions and abilities. Conditional customers have the ability to use conventional transit whenever their conditions are not present, and we will be introducing conditional trip matching later this year and into the winter of 2020. Another motion that came out of the previous TAC meeting was that we improve communications to Wheel-Trans customers, and TTC clarifies and confirms that all clients with conditional eligibility are still eligible for door-to-door until such time as the Toronto Transit Commission is fully accessible. So I can confirm that is not the case. What will be happening is Family of Services does connect Wheel-Trans customers from origin to destination using accessible Wheel-Trans, bus, streetcar, or subway stations. And as stations become more accessible, they will be added to the FOS network. So as such, there's no need to wait till 2025. We currently have accessible routes that customers can take and take advantage of, so we are implementing that immediately. If an accessible connection cannot be made, that is when door-to-door trips will be provided. And the last point is on re-registration. So re-registration, we've heard a lot about this. This is going to allow customers to update their profiles and medical history. It's a fair and equitable way. It ensures equity under the AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And re-registration will only be for customers who registered for Wheel-Trans service before January 1st, 2017. It will begin again later on this year, towards the end of 2019. And this will be able to make sure that all of our customers are in one of the 3 categories outlined by AODA: conditional, unconditional, and temporary. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Okay. Dwayne, thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, Jason, if you want to hang on tight, we're going to hear from public deputations first, and then we're going to invite the staff back up to the front to answer any questions. We do have a deputant, and she'll probably be known, very many of you will be familiar with her. It's Terry Lynn Langdon, who's a former TAC member, probably wrote more motions than anyone I recall. Terry Lynn, it's great to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you will have 5 minutes to speak to this particular item.
Okay. To date, Wheel-Trans has not sat down with a group of parents with disabilities to discuss what it is their transit needs are. As early as last month, I got a letter that my conditional status isn't changing, and one of the things that the letter said was that I would be able to take Wheel-Trans from door-to-door service with conditions, but it didn't acknowledge that I would be traveling with my daughter, who is currently 13 months old. The fact that I was on the TAC committee who unanimously said at the time, and I remember it's very clear in my mind, that none of these conditions should be implemented until which time the transit is more accessible in 2025, and that the TTC said that they would not be implementing. Because when I deputed on my initial conditions, the TTC representatives were here and they said nothing would be implemented until 2025. And I recently got a letter saying that the conditions will be implemented in December 2020. This is highly concerning to myself and other folks in the disability community who are legitimate transit users of TTC Wheel-Trans. The other thing that's highly concerning to me is that all of these appeals processes are happening in medical facilities vis-a-vis the Sunnybrook Arthritis Hospital. So the TTC is also using medical resources and the services of OTs to implement these changes. And my experience of being assessed was that an OT asked me 3 times to walk across the floor unaided while I was pregnant, and even after I had said to her that I had been evaluated for falls very recently, she still persisted by asking the 3rd time. That is an issue that's not following due diligence for any OT, but additionally, I'm very concerned, and I did ask questions previously about why healthcare resources were being put into place to discriminate against people with disabilities trying to access transit. I have been asked to go to visit a panel vis-a-vis TTC Wheel-Trans to try to get my eligibility reversed, which would be the 3rd time I'm appealing. And I don't think that the appeals process is appropriate nor fair. And I think the idea that anyone would have this much time to devote to accessing transit is unreasonable. On Wednesday, the TTC, our pre-booked Wheel-Trans ride, came an hour and 55 minutes late to the daycare. It was almost 2 hours late. When I called to say as much, the TTC did not explain, they did not apologize, they didn't offer anything. They didn't even offer an explanation, and I gave them an opportunity to do that. We have had since May 1st permissions to use one particular stroller on TTC rides, and as early as last week as well, a driver refused to take us to our destination because we were in that stroller. And this happens on a weekly basis. Of course, the issue is systemic, so the bigger issue for me and for parents with disabilities is that the TTC has said you need to have individual accommodations set in place to even travel with a child, and that's not acceptable. There needs to be more of a systemic review, more of a way that the TTC is taking ownership and engaging the community in terms of how parents with disabilities can travel with young children. There isn't even a policy with Wheel-Trans right now to address the ridership of the youngest of our community members, being infants that are less than 2 years of age, and how that would work. Because there are age groups within that lifespan where you would never consider carrying a child or even baby wearing because they would be too small. And I experienced that with my daughter's first immunizations and discussions with Wheel-Trans.
Just your final thought.
Pardon?
Your final thought, you're almost out of time.
Okay, great. But that's fine. I don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Are there any questions for Terry Lynn from the members of TAC to clarify her comments? Wendy?
Thanks, Terry Lynn. Do you have any sense of whether or not the approval for you to have a stroller, is that conditional? Is there like a timeline around that, or is that just into the future?
The timeline around that is will be relieved soon, I feel, just based on my daughter's age. So when she can walk, we won't be using the stroller, just because it's been it's been so hard. But no, the TTC has not said, again, the TTC hasn't recognized that I have a child in these recent communications where they're saying that my status for eligibility is being reviewed. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up question? No? Any other members with questions? I have a question. Terry Lynn, understanding that you mentioned, and first of all, congratulations on the baby. I know, it's a lot of work, but a lot of joyful work. With respect to the request to meet with parents, was that a formal request that went to the operators of Wheel-Trans? And who are these parents that are supposed to be meeting with Wheel-Trans? Is it a formal group?
I don't know of a formal group, but I have formally requested that happen.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily coming out of TCAT per se?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with respect to the stroller that you spoke about, this stroller, is there only just one stroller that's approved by the TTC for Wheel-Trans use?
No. What was happening with that was we have a very good daycare that we access, and the daycare witnessed TTC officials coming in and denying us rides. So they said, look, there's a place downtown, it has several strollers, and we invited Wheel-Trans to come in and approve a stroller. Because they were not, I had gone through several stroller ideas and they were not approving it. So it's a very unreasonable, like that should never be the process.
So I see. So just to understand, so it was a bit of ad hoc. So you had a daycare operator that was watching Wheel-Trans refuse pickups at the daycare based on the type of stroller that the parents were using.
Yeah.
So then the daycare operator suggested go choose the stroller that the TTC would approve.
Yeah.
And that is the stroller that you end up purchasing. Is that correct?
Exactly.
And to this day, you're still now having some problems boarding the Wheel-Trans buses with the technically approved stroller.
Right.
There's hundreds of strollers. I just got
Yeah.
There's literally hundreds of strollers out there for those who've been in the market. And so is there beyond the one stroller that you purchased, were there other strollers that are available for purchase, or is that the one stroller?
The requirements is that the stroller be welded and that it have 4 points of being welded. However, TTC staff, even if they are fantastic, even if they want to assist riders, I'm very sorry, even if they want to assist riders as much as possible, are very confused about this criteria or what the current Wheel-Trans rules are. So, for example, some Wheel-Trans drivers have said that you absolutely need to have 4-point tie-downs, which is not a 4-point welded product. That would be tie-downs on each welded point that the driver could see where the stroller is being welded. Other drivers have said, I can't put a tie-down where there's mesh, which I think is so silly. But like, just at the end of the day, the point is that the policies are not understood by Wheel-Trans drivers, and then there are a variety of different policies that Wheel-Trans currently has in terms of parents with young children, but the communication isn't there. They also, I feel, have not put effort into communicating this effectively. There are absolutely notes on my file, but again, I feel like the process of it being increasingly individualized is not okay, because the average parent who is, I mean, I don't like the word average, but parents that are just getting on TTC don't have to deal with any of this.
And with respect to notes on your file, just because I don't know what it looks like from the TTC driver operations side, does the TTC driver that's coming in, driving the Wheel-Trans bus, can they see all the notes on your file so they can make a clearer assessment? Like, what do they have access to?
What I understand is that many drivers would have to call in to see all the notes on the file because it gets cut off.
I see. And just to understand the concern that you had regarding the service enhancements, especially around confirming clients with eligibility to door-to-door service and not necessarily stopping that earlier, that's not what I heard from the TTC staff. I heard something very different. So what you're saying, just to clarify, is that you're concerned that even though the TTC system is not 100% accessible, because we know that that's not the case today, is that you and perhaps others are being asked that their service is being canceled pre-2025, and the concern is that the system is not accessible.
Right.
So don't take away the Wheel-Trans service and the specialized service if the system is not accessible, because you're leaving us out without options.
Yeah, my need for accessible transit exists purely because the TTC is not accessible.
Right.
The daycare is located near DuPont Station. DuPont Station is not accessible. When I'm doing that route myself during the summer, I'm going to Queens Park Station, right, which is not very close to my house. Then I'm going to St. George Station, and I'm transferring to Spadina, and then I'm taking a bus to DuPont. And all of these like 4 transfers are because the TTC is not accessible.
Okay, Terry Lynn, thank you. I'm out of time myself. Any other members with questions for the speaker?
Sorry, please discuss further. I have to go. I have an appointment. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry Lynn. So now let's invite TTC staff back to the front of the room. Are there questions from members? We'll start with Jason. Jason, hang on. They're just settling in front of the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start your clock. Go ahead, please.
My computer or your computer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I've got 2 questions on 2 points you mentioned. One was the trying to make the appeal process available to folks who want to have some sort of remote access, and you said that was going to be studied and you're looking into it. I'm wondering if you have a time frame by which there'll be a decision made on that. And the second question refers back to what Terry Lynn was talking about stations and routes that are not accessible and won't be potentially until 2025. Would you consider holding off on having people have to re-register until such time as those stations and routes are fully accessible? Thanks.
So yeah, I'll address the first one, the time frame on Skype. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we consult the right amount of people. I think it's even Terry Lynn herself said that we should be consulting a lot of different groups, and I think that's important. So we want to consult with ACAT. We want to consult with our vendor. We want to make sure that if we do offer Skype, that it is going to still have value. In terms of a time frame, I think we need some time to set up those meetings, have those discussions before a decision is made. So it would be hard pressed for me to say a time frame. I think we would need several months for sure, in the range of 6 to 8 months. We want to make sure we actually talk this out. We also want to talk with customers. We want to hear, is this going to be of value to you? Because as of right now, from experience, we don't get a lot of requests for people to use Skype or to do it remotely. So we don't hear that now. However, we want to do our due diligence. We want to ask customers. We want to have full consultations. We're going to see if this is really going to be valuable to some of our customers, and is it feasible. After having those discussions and really fleshing everything out, then we'll be able to decide on whether or not we move forward with Skype. So I would say a venture, I guess, of 6 to 8 month time frame. But again, depending on when those meetings are made. So that's the time frame. And in terms of stations and re-registration, so it's important to understand re-registration and conditional trip matching are 2 completely different things. So we're going through a re-registration because we're required to by AODA. We have to put all of our customers in one of 3 categories. They have to be either unconditional, conditional, or temporary. That must happen. That doesn't determine whether or not you will be getting service or not. That's just us determining your eligibility. Then there's conditional trip matching. That's something different, and that will match a customer's condition to the type of service they get. That is happening again, yes, later this year, and that's solely dependent on whether or not you're capable of using the conventional system. So if you're capable of using the conventional system, we're going to ask that you take the conventional system. So as we know, we spent a lot of money on our streetcars, buses, subways, stations to make them accessible. And the whole purpose of that was to provide independence for our Wheel-Trans customers so that they are not treated any different than anybody who needs to take conventional or public transit. They don't have to depend on specialized transit. So it's very important for us to get that available. So again, it's important to understand that we're not going to force you to take a trip that's not accessible. We will provide you with a trip that is fully accessible. There are many people who work along routes that they can take the subway completely from one end of the city to the other end on the subway that's fully accessible. There's no barrier in their route. There's some people who live on a streetcar line. I was out doing a plainclothes ride in a wheelchair myself, and I met somebody out there. He lives and works on King Street. He takes a King Street car to work, and he takes a King Street car home. No issue at all. He's taking a family of services trip. He's doing it now. There are many customers who are doing it now. For the ones who have a route that is not accessible, we will not give you a family of services trip. You will get a Wheel-Trans door-to-door trip. So it's important to understand that we are not going to offer you a trip that is not accessible. We will only offer you a trip that's fully accessible. And it's happening now. Many customers are already doing it, and we just want to roll that out to all the customers.
Jason, do you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, hands going up. I'm going to start with Howard, and then Wendy, and then Bhuvani.
At the present time, you're sending out letters to seniors advising them of what the conditions are for their rides. The unfortunate thing is they don't understand the letter. I've seen the letters and they're very confusing, right? Are you prepared to review that?
Yes. So as a matter of fact, we had a general ACAT meeting yesterday, and this was brought up. And we're actually deferring that to our communication subcommittee. That we understand that there may be some confusion with the way that we've worded the letters. So we're looking at that. Actually, we are looking at rewording them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. Wendy, questions?
I have a number of questions. So I wonder, can you tell me, did you get any results from the evaluation of the Family of Services pilot? When we talked to Ms. Wiggins about this, there was to be an evaluation of that pilot, and did you receive any?
Did we receive an evaluation?
Did you undertake an evaluation of the Family of Services?
Yes.
And what were the results of the evaluation?
So we've received, what we did was we did surveys, and we've got a number of comments from customers. And some of the comments were positive, some of them were negative. So for the comments that were positive, we were very pleased with them and we were happy. For the ones that were negative, we took action on those. So any issues with specifics, so specifically there would be issues with maybe a particular stop that may not be identified. There's some signage issues at some locations that we need to address. So as we receive those comments, we take action with them through our ACAT committee and consultation.
Did you have any element of the evaluation that actually looked at people with disabilities using the system?
In terms of?
Of an accessible trip. Was there a functional part of the evaluation?
Did customers use the family of services? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, so you had
Yes.
people with disabilities who used parts of the system that were accessible and parts of the system that would link them to paratransit.
Yes.
That was the intention of Family of Services, right?
Absolutely, yes. So we have,
So
our
did you-
ACAT members do that as well, yes, and they give us feedback on that.
But it was a survey that you conducted.
No, so we have ACAT members who also go out and use family of services.
Did you have anybody outside of ACAT do that?
We have a number of customers who are using family services today and provide feedback on it.
Is my question not clear?
No, your question is clear, and I'm just perplexed by the answer. I think, so when a survey, I don't want to take Wendy's time. Wendy, please continue with your questions. I think the gentleman is, Sir Dwayne is answering the question the way he sees fit. Clearly, the answer is not as specific and as clear as I would have hoped myself.
Can I also ask, what is the actual process then? So if you have a person with a disability who wants to take a trip on transit, and you're saying we're only going to give them a route that's accessible, how does that work? How does that process work? So somebody calls paratransit and they say, I want to go from X to Y, and then they talk to somebody on the phone about the alternatives? Or could you walk me through that?
Yeah, certainly. There's several different options. They can call in, or they could use our self-booking website to book their trip. They just say, I want to go from A to B, and we provide them with a route.
Is it a person with a disability who's providing them with the judgment on whether or not that is an accessible route?
No, it's a system. So we have a
So
system.
it's not a person who's been through that route themselves?
It's not manually done, no.
And can you explain to me how a person who uses a wheelchair can get on the TTC at rush hour? So somebody who uses a wheelchair, how do they get onto a TTC subway car at rush hour?
So we have a condition that's called rush hour, and if it's rush hour, a person with a wheelchair would not be asked to get on the TTC. They'll be given door-to-door service.
Can you explain to me what is the process of enforcing the priority seating on the TTC for people with disabilities? So we have blue seats on the TTC that are supposed to be there for people with disabilities. Is there a process for enforcing that?
So our operators, when they see a person in a mobility device and they require to use the area, they're asked to get out and ensure that they get to use that seat.
Who asks them?
The operator.
Okay, so we're going to have some comments later that I think are going to disagree with that process. Is there a consideration for parents with disabilities in the policies that are developed at Wheel-Trans?
Is there a consideration for parents with disabilities? Yes, absolutely. So we worked very closely with Terry Lynn, actually. She brought up some concerns about parents with disabilities, and we are actually working on a new child and infants policy related to strollers and traveling with infants. So we have a traveling with infants policy that we're working on right now. Again, working with our ACAT committee, our legal and human rights team, to make sure that we get it right and make some changes to it and put that out later on this year.
Okay, thank you very much. Bhuvani to ask questions.
Hi, I just had a question regarding one of Terry Lynn's earlier points about wait times. So as a Wheel-Trans user myself, on more than one occasion, I've had to wait more than an hour, sometimes for a ride. And this can be quite difficult and challenging if the weather conditions are bad. And for someone like me who can't stand for extended periods of time as well, this can be a real challenge and a barrier. I'm just wondering why Wheel-Trans hasn't adopted a real-time tracking function like most rideshare apps do, as I feel like this would not only address those issues as well, but in other instances where I've had missed rides due to the drivers going to an incorrect location as well, I feel like that would also address that. So I'm just wondering where Wheel-Trans stands on that.
That's a very good question. Actually, we are in the process of updating our software system, our scheduling and software system. That's coming in a later phase. We will have a Where's My Bus app that comes later on. So customers will be able to track the bus like you've mentioned, like other ride-sharing customers. We haven't gotten there yet. We've updated our scheduling system to include family of services. We did that in December of 18. But there are further upgrades to our scheduling software system, and that particular function is one of the things that will be coming with it. So thank you for that question.
Okay, and thank you for the question and answer. Anyone else? Okay, Miranda, please, question.
Yes, I'm just thinking about the assessments themselves. I'm just wondering what measures are being taken to ensure that there's proper guidelines being followed for the assessments.
So for the assessments themselves, we hire professionals to do these assessments, and what we expect that these experts are the ones who are able to provide us with exceptional evaluations. They've been in the business for a long time, so we're depending on their professionalism. If we do get complaints, if we do get concerns, it doesn't end there. So there are times where a customer may not agree with a professional's evaluation, and we then will also take a look at it and take a third look at it, a fourth look, to make sure that everything is going well. We haven't had many complaints about Medisys or Sunnybrook. They're very reputable in the community. However, we do look at those, and there are evaluations, and we have set contracts with them. And if we have issues with them, then we move on to another vendor. Absolutely.
Okay. Stephanie, and then Liv.
Hi, thanks very much. When you were speaking earlier, and I'm sorry that I missed your entire presentation, but just for fullness, I am a Wheel-Trans user of over 20 years, the length of time that I've lived in Toronto, and I've seen some strong improvements, but I also have some very strong reservations on your proposal, and that's how I'm going to begin. I'd like to know how you define someone who is capable of using the family of services, because someone might be capable one day, they might not be capable the next. Someone might be capable if they do have a support person available, some might not be capable with that. Some might be capable for certain routes. And then after that, I also would like to know if there has been any review, again, relating to time issues. So I think that Wheel-Trans and TTC would probably be in the business of ensuring independence of individuals with disabilities, which includes attending employment and work. And how exactly, if we are going to be transferring from service to service to service, is that going to create an equitable way for someone to be gainfully employed and not be hindered by even more transportation issues than already exist? Thank you.
Thanks. So I believe the question is how do we account for all the different conditions that a customer might have? So we do have a long list of conditions.
You used the word capable, so I'm keeping you on that word, please.
Okay, capable. Yeah, so how do we determine if a customer is capable of using the system? And so like you mentioned, it's very similar to what you've mentioned there. We determine their capability based on a doctor's assessment and their own application that's been submitted. So we would be able to determine, based on what they've submitted in their application, what they're capable of doing, how they're capable of using the system.
I need to interject for a second. Are you paying for the doctor's assessment? I need to get, so I would need to get a doctor to assess my disability, and I would have to pay someone to do that. Is TTC going to be paying for that?
No, so this is done by, so the application, there's a portion that the customer submits and a portion that needs to be filled out by a professional.
I've already submitted that many years ago. So if I need to be reevaluated, would I need to get another doctor to do an assessment, or whatever kind of practitioner you would accept? And I would have to pay for that.
If you need to do a re-registration, if you're a legacy customer who has not been put into one of the categories, conditional, unconditional.
Forget about me. I'm using me if person A has been determined that they need to be re-registered or reassessed, whatever terminology you would like me to use.
Yes.
I do understand what that means. Thank you. I would like to know whether or not I have to go to a certain type of practitioner and who is going to be paying for that assessment, because there is a large cost. Those assessments, I'm not sure if you know, they're not free. Go ahead.
Yes, you would. The person A would have to see a healthcare professional. There's a portion of the application that needs to be filled out by a healthcare professional.
And TTC will not subsidize someone who is on a lower income to get reassessed?
And the TTC does not pay for the healthcare portion to be completed for our customers, no.
Thank you. And go ahead with the remainder.
Okay, yeah, so as I was saying earlier, customers we determine their capability based on what they submit, the healthcare provider, and what the customer submits themselves in the application. And there could be any number of conditions applied to a customer's personal file, including good day, bad day. So if one day they're having a good day and they feel like they can use a conventional system, some days they can use it, then they would use it. If it's a bad day, then they won't use it, including winter months, not being able to travel in winter months, and including rush hours. So there's a number of conditions based on what the customer puts in the application. That's how we determine when they're capable of using the conventional.
So is this an algorithm that you're using for these conditions? Can you please
No, it's a team. We have a team of Wheel-Trans employees who assess the application.
That's all for now, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie. Liv to ask questions. Final questioner.
Okay. Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, as you are developing your child, infant, parent policies, I know a number of Wheel-Trans users in our community are grandparents, our aunts and uncles, our caregivers, neighbors, friends. I would encourage you to think more broadly than the parent-child relationship as you develop that policy. And I'm wondering if that is part of your thinking, to think more broadly about caregivers. Pretty much any Wheel-Trans user could be traveling with an infant.
Absolutely, yes. So that is part of the discussion. And again, so we're open to sitting down and discussing it with anybody. So so I don't want it to seem as though, you know, it's a closed book. Once we create a policy, that's it. It's set in stone. That's definitely not the case. We understand that we're ever evolving, and there may be some things that we miss. So we're very open to hearing from almost anybody in the community. I know Terry Lynn mentioned earlier about being reached out to about a parent group. To be honest with you, I've never received that invitation. I'm going to be completely honest with you. If we did, we'd be more than happy to hear from them. We'd invite them to one of our ACAT meetings. We'd love to hear from them. We want to hear from as many people as the public as possible to get this right. We're all about getting it right for our customers. And if we miss something, I'll be the first person to say, sorry, we overlooked that, we missed that. Let us correct it.
I know Terry Lynn has a lot of expertise and a lot of lived experience expertise, so I would definitely recommend going ahead with that meeting. My other question is, through this reassessment process, do you expect number of users to go up or go down?
So we expect the number of users to stay exactly the same. So through this re-registration process, we don't expect that people will lose Wheel-Trans service. We just think that the type of service they receive will be different. So family of services still includes Wheel-Trans. It just means that we'll take you from Wheel-Trans from your door, instead of from your door to directly to where you're going, we may take you from your door to an accessible subway station, and then the subway line will take you to the rest of the way. So you'll still have Wheel-Trans service. We may offer, it may be a combination of Wheel-Trans and accessible service, TTC conventional service. Again, I just want to remind the committee here, the whole reason why the TTC has gone to great lengths to upgrade streetcars, buses, and subways is to make the conventional system accessible for all. That was the reason for it. So we want our customers to take advantage of it. We planned for many of our customers to be able to use conventional transit, so they don't have to call and book an appointment for Wheel-Trans. You know, there's a 4-hour minimum that you've got to call to book a trip with Wheel-Trans.
Yep.
We want to make it more accessible for everybody. We're trying to make it independent for everybody. So now that our system is much more accessible, if you're capable of using it, we encourage you to take it. It encourages freedom and independence so that you don't have to call in 4 hours in advance. If you feel like going, you go out to an accessible station.
Knowing that there'll be a large constituency of people who will not be able to use it independently, and that service will, need to support those people as well.
So knowing that if people are not able to use our conventional system, Wheel-Trans will always be there to offer door-to-door service.
Thank you.
Liv, thank you very much for your questions. Anyone else? We'll move right into speaking. Anyone to speak? Stephanie, go ahead, please, and then Wendy.
I'm going to tell you about my experience just getting to this meeting today. I booked my ride 1 week in advance, like a good little Wheel-Trans user. I'm sorry for my sarcasm. I've had a very rough morning. The ride that I was offered was to pick me up at 6:30 in the morning to get here for a 9:30 meeting. That is what Wheel-Trans door-to-door service offered me, which is fine. I understand. No problem. So what are my alternatives today? My alternatives, I thought, okay, I know that Uber Wave, I'll try them. No cars. Well, I knew I was coming with someone, so guess what? I was very smart as well. I lived and purposely moved to an area so I could use the family of services. So I know where to go. I went to, is it okay if I indicate exactly where I went?
As you like.
Thank you. I went to the Dundas West Station from the 40 bus with my companion. I have no idea how Wheel-Trans is going to then compensate or someone like me if they expect me to use the Family Life Services independently, because I always need a companion if I'm going to be using those regular services. And I have the kind of disability where I've seen the progression. So, as I said, thank you for making the accessible service more accessible. But there are some problems still, unfortunately. And so I went through to Bloor and Yonge. And as I was getting onto the subway, one of the brand new subways, using the wheelchair accessible door, that's there, that's listed, because I always go to the designated area, I got stuck. The back of my wheelchair, which has never happened to me, I just started normally going. I saw there was a bump, so I accelerated a bit. Thankfully, there wasn't someone there. And the back of my wheelchair got stuck in the lip between the subway and the platform. And I've heard people say this to me. I've heard them say it. I've never experienced it. And I can tell you it was the scariest moment of my life, because I was trapped. And those doors and bells are ringing, and a bunch of strangers, thank God, somehow managed to lift it out and push me into the subway. And that's what happened to me. And the thing is that that's the reality. I was lucky because I was with someone, but if I was alone, I would never be able to have, I would have probably have just stopped and turned around and gone home. Because, and what does that do then for the person? My life I have spent working to advance others to be able to live independently, pay taxes, pay all those kinds of good things that we're supposed to do as citizens and promote others. But I can't, in all good consciousness, think that this is going to enhance the lives of people with disabilities, because unfortunately, those kinds of barriers, you can't foresee. You can't write it, you can't write an algorithm for it, and you're never going to be able to identify all those little things. And it goes from, that's a large example, and then it also goes down to when the elevators are down, when all of the, they did a beautiful job. Again, I will say this publicly. This is at Keele and Dundas West, because I've also put a thing into 311, no offense, but months ago. They redid the entire four corners, dug it up from scratch, and there is still an inch lip on the curb cuts. And do you think that that's safe? And I can't guarantee that that's safe for me. And if I know that it's not safe for me, I'm quite confident it's not safe for others who either have a more progressive disability, or even those who are more independent, because it's the safety factor of individuals and the value of their lives and their time. I think that the thing is that you really undervalue what time means to a person with a disability. There is absolutely no way that I could be up and ready for a 6:30 ride to get here for a 9:30 meeting. And I actually think that's a bit ludicrous.
Stephanie, thank you very much for those comments. Just to hear from our next speaker, Wendy.
Thank you. I have a number of concerns, obviously, about what's being proposed. Excuse me. One of them is squarely around the issue of this lack of evaluation. So when the TTC, when Wheel-Trans was here previously, we heard that you were going to do, as part of your evaluation, you were actually going to have people with disabilities using the traditional system in the manner in which you claim you want to see it used, right? That you're going to have a functional evaluation that's going to involve people with disabilities who are using the traditional system for part of their ride and using paratransit for part of their ride. That's the intention, right? It sounds to me like you've done no evaluation of any kind that comes close to that level of evaluation of the system. So if you're asking people about their experiences, if you're only talking to the folks on ACAT, if you're only using a set route that you already know is available to people, you are not seeing the system in the manner in which you are claiming that people with disabilities are supposed to be able to use it. So what I would recommend in terms of the evaluation is that you actually get people from outside of ACAT, you talk to people with disabilities in the community as well, you come up with a number of random routes, or you design an opportunity for somebody with a disability to take a random route into the TTC and go to an undetermined, predetermined location, and you talk to them about the barriers that they encounter in doing that. In that way, you will be able to see the kinds of barriers that people with disabilities face, like the one that Stephanie's talking about, in using the family of services system. Until you do that, this is all theoretical, right? You're talking about a traditional system that's supposed to be accessible to people without ever having any kind of defined or undefined testing of people outside of the parameters of a survey. So that is very problematic to me. What's particularly problematic about that as well is that now you're saying what we heard previously around the conditional status, so conditional status being afforded to people, but until 2025, they were still able to use paratransit, they were not required to use family of services, that's not even happening. So you're putting people into a system that is not accessible, it's not fully, anywhere near fully accessible, it has not been tested, and you're requiring them to do it now versus later. So that seems particularly problematic to me. I wanted to talk about the priority seats. They're not enforced. I have spoken to drivers and said, there are loads of people with disabilities on this vehicle. Can you make sure that they can use these seats? And all they do is they play a taped recorded message, and that's it. So that's very hard for people with disabilities to be able to use the traditional system again. The criteria, I can guarantee that the criteria that you're using to put conditions on people with disabilities using the TTC is not based on their knowledge of what their disability enables them to do. So we know that you're using OTs and assessors. You could ask people with disabilities what they're capable of doing, but you're probably not doing that. And I think that probably the criteria that's coming up is contrary to what they're telling you. That is problematic, and you're saying that the numbers of people overall is not going to go down. They're just going to change. I wonder if you would make those numbers available to the public. I wonder if there's some way that we could see that that's going to be the case, because I don't think so. So I'm actually very concerned about these changes. I think the lack of evaluation underpins the difficulties that you're going to have with people in real life using family of services in the way that you envision, and I would suggest that you rethink it. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Anyone else to speak? Okay, seeing none, I will just take a few minutes to speak and also to move a motion. And the clerk can please put that motion onto the screen, but I'll just read it. City Council requests the TTC Board to request TTC Wheel-Trans staff to meet with parents, grandparents, and caregivers of infants and children as soon as possible to streamline the process of bringing strollers onto Wheel-Trans vehicles to ensure accessible and consistent services across the system, and to provide an update to this committee in the first quarter of 2020. Our committee will be meeting again on February the 3rd as well as March the 27th, so hopefully that will give you enough time to have those discussions. I do want to thank the staff for coming out today to provide us with the presentation. I think what I recognize between the lived experience of those who are actually members of this particular committee, as well as members of the public, is perhaps there's not enough service guarantee. And I'd like to just request that moving forward, to be able to structure the evaluation process in a much more formal way. So therefore, it's not necessarily conversational, but rather in a requirement for institutional change. Policies and programs and how they're operationalized is critically important, but also to measure outcomes. If we're not measuring outcomes, then it's very difficult to evaluate where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And I think that is something that every bureaucracy, every major corporation, institution, and division at the City of Toronto should be doing it. I know that we struggle with that with respect to 311 service. But for those who are living with accessibility challenges, who really rely on transportation and TTC in particular, this is a matter of whether or not they are gainfully employed. They can pick up their child. They can go to their own place of social responsibility if they're caring for an elderly parent. All of that can basically just ruin the day. And means that they're not going to be able to participate fully in civil society, and we want that for every individual and every member of our community. With respect to the social determinants of health, this is one of the things that's on my mind a lot these days. Is how do we ensure that people in Toronto are healthy and that they are well? And one of the big social factors is access to transportation. And if there is a population within Toronto that is relying on a service that's designed specifically to meet their needs where they are, and somehow that service is not necessarily meeting that need consistently where they are, then I think that it requires some rethinking. And I do want to thank the work that is being done. I recognize that changing culture within institutions is not easy. I certainly do appreciate that. But so much is riding on your success. Like literally everybody is dependent on the TTC getting it right. And I think you've heard just from a few members of the committee that they would like to see your success because it means that they will be successful. And I think the only way to do that is making sure that there's clear and consistent policies, that they happen to change system-wide, and that there is a constant feedback loop that will allow us to give you constructive feedback where appropriate. And hopefully you'll be able to take that feedback and then turn that into action that will change the outcome the next time around. So thank you very much. Any questions of the mover of the motion? No? Seeing none, let's just take this to vote. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That carries. And with that, thank you very much for your presentation today. So we'll move back to the agenda, and I recognize we spent a little bit of time on this particular item, and I'm glad we did because it is important. But just moving right along, it's the chair's report, which has already been distributed. But I'm just going to read through some high-level pieces. My chair's report contains that back in September, I brought some greetings to the launch of a brand new bus operating out of Dixon Hall. It's a pretty important, vital service that operates for Dixon Hall seniors. They make 12 round trips per week, collecting 75 participants in senior day programming. When the TTC to Wheel-Trans doesn't meet their needs, the Dixon Hall bus will meet their needs. So there's a number of different other transportation modes that are out there, but not everybody is so fortunate to be a Dixon Hall senior, which is why we need to have Wheel-Trans working. But this is more importantly, they offer nutritional programs through their Meals on Wheels program, and they do so with 1,300 corporate volunteers who support these seniors. So we are very grateful for their work. And as the chair of TAC, I was bringing greetings on behalf of our committee. Also budgeting for accessibility. The City of Toronto has now directed staff to report back on the feasibility of exempting all costs related to city employees and the compliance of accessibility. And if you'll recall, that was a matter that was originating out of our TAC committee, and I'm very pleased to say that that is now going to be at the budget 2020 process. I will invite all members of TAC to come out, if you can, to depute or at least write in support of that motion. It didn't pass in 2018, during the 2019 budget, I should say. I understand that we're going to get a little bit more support on the floor of council, but just to make sure we push it over, a few letters of support certainly doesn't hurt. Protecting local services. City Council adopted a motion that I put on the floor to protest the provincial government forward cuts to healthcare. We know that there's going to be about $1 billion over the next 5 years that will directly impact Toronto public health. This, of course, is most directly going to harm vulnerable people, including those who are in long-term care facilities, people who use ambulatory services, people who require services in hospitals. And there is a rally that's going to be happening on November the 9th. In a few days, it's happening in cities across Ontario, happening right here at Nathan Phillips Square. I will invite all of you to join us on November the 9th at 11:30, right outside on the square. Hopefully we'll have better weather than we did last night. And City Council endorsed the the Workforce Equity and Inclusion Plan, specifically to increase and foster diversity in the makeup in the Toronto Public Service. This plan aims to accelerate progress towards the city's goal of having a public service that truly reflects the population that they serve. Then we've had some ceremonial flag raisings. The first one was in October. City of Toronto proclaimed October to be Dwarfism Awareness and Acceptance Month. There's approximately 1 in 10,000 people that are born with dwarfism, and this was done on the rooftop. October was also, there's lots of things that are jammed into October. October was also National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and the City of Toronto proclaimed that. The city recognized the positive and valuable contributions from those that are living with disabilities and the work that they do in their workplaces. And of course, everything here is to produce and promote and further enhance inclusion in the City of Toronto. And October was also Occupational Therapy Month, and the City of Toronto also declared that. And occupational therapists, interestingly enough, we had some conversation about that field today. They work to improve the health and well-being of patients by solving the problems that interfere with people's ability to take on everyday activities such as self-care, being productive, doing leisure activities. There was one item that was discussed at City Council that's not in my chair's report, and I do regret that we never had a chance to discuss this matter at TAC, and that was the city's winter maintenance program. For those who know, the City of Toronto, the old City of Toronto is the only part of the city, the legacy City of Toronto, with the highest pedestrian use. We're the only part of the city that does not get snow removal on sidewalks. I'm seeing the head nods and the eye rolls. Unfortunately, that report never made it before TAC, and it should have. I wrote letters to all the divisions to make sure that any items that would affect our committee, that our committee provide advice to, it'd be great to hear from them so that they can hear from us. That did not happen. I'm going to try to bring that item here in February and hopefully be able to still give them some feedback. So that's the one item that didn't make it into my chair's report before the deadline, and only because City Council met on Tuesday and Wednesday. And with that, if I can have a motion to receive the chair's report. Jason, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so let's get to item number 2, employment accessibility at the City of Toronto, and we have a presentation. Okay, welcome back, Barbara.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. When you're ready.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us back at committee today. I am Barbara Shulman, the Director of Strategic Recruitment, Compensation and Employment Services in our People and Equity Division, and I'm here today with Hallie Farah, our relatively new Senior HR Consultant responsible for diversity and next-gen initiatives. This morning, we are going to, Hallie's going to take you through a presentation on our current actions and plans for increasing recruitment of people with disabilities in the Toronto Public Service. And she'll walk you through some of the things that we're doing right now, as well as some of the plans that we have going forward. This, of course, is an update. We have presented to this committee in the past, and what we hope we do today is give you a more fulsome understanding of the additional efforts and actions that we're taking to increase representation in our workforce of people with disabilities. And one of the things that we hope you'll see through our presentation is that we are taking a broader or more holistic approach to our strategy. And really what that means is that in addition to focusing on our broadened outreach to the communities where we're actually wanting to make sure that our candidate pools are representative of people with disabilities, it's beyond just the numbers of increasing recruitment. What we're really looking at is what's going on in our organization throughout the entire life cycle of the employee, from the moment they consider applying for a job all the way through hiring, being onboarded, and their time spent as an employee in the Toronto Public Service until the time of exit. Because what we know from our ongoing education and learning and efforts focused on continuous improvement in terms of how to be truly successful in increasing diverse representation broadly and specifically with people with disabilities, is that it's much more than just focusing on increasing hiring by 10% or 20%. It's really what we're doing in our organization to build that inclusive culture, and in this case specifically focused on the needs of people with disabilities. So what you'll hear in our presentation are the things that we're looking at because we're focused on recruitment. So I've talked about broadly the employee life cycle, but our energy and efforts right now are really focused on every stage of the hiring process. So from the time that the vacancy is identified and we're determining where we're going to go to source candidates for the opportunity, to where we advertise the job, to how we carry out screening and implement the assessments for candidates, and how we offer and onboard new hires. Those are some of the areas that Hallie's going to take us through. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Barb. Good morning. So I'll quickly just go over the background. Barb did a great job of giving us some context as to what this presentation is about. But through developing this strategy or this framework, what we've done was a current state analysis. And in performing this analysis, we've determined that there were some areas of opportunity in our internal practices, specifically regarding our recruitment efforts for persons with disability. From this analysis, we've developed a diversity framework. And this framework really is to support the workforce equity and inclusion plan that we have already in place. And with this framework, we have an accompanying diversity action plan. This is the tangible. So it's one thing to have the framework, but what we're working on right now as well is the action plan, or a training tool that's intended to steer and drive the achievement for increased representation, specifically for individuals with disability. But in developing this framework, of course, what we needed to be clear about in working with both our internal and external stakeholders is what our commitment was, what we aspire to be, and how we're going to get there. So I'll tell you what the key focus areas were in developing this strategy, and then I'll tell you more specifically what we've accomplished so far and what our strategic vision will be. So in putting together this framework, what we're focusing on would be building a compelling value proposition for attracting persons with disability talent. Really, what's in it for individuals or candidates or employees with disability to self-identify? We understand that disclosure, of course, is a sensitive topic, but putting together a strategy as to why should individuals with disability identify, also leveraging in the competitive analysis that we've done, we'll be looking to leverage some of the best-in-class persons with disability recruitment and retention to ensure that we have accessible recruitment and selection process, while also partnering up with our internal stakeholders and other external organizations that work specifically with persons with disability from a training perspective and also from a recruitment perspective. The approach that we're looking to take, or that we have taken, Barb touched on this, is very recruitment focused. So this is a candidate-centric approach. What that really means is that it ensures that all candidates with disability who apply for position have a positive experience with the City of Toronto, while we also take a deliberate action to drive progress in every part of the recruitment initiative. So what we've done in this approach is we're focusing on 5 key areas. The planning stage. So who are we consulting with? Are we making sure that internally we're consulting with the right stakeholders, individuals that actually do identify to be from this group? How are we attracting talent? So how are we going to market and showing up? In terms of sourcing, where do we go to find talent, and and how do we engage with individuals with disability. And in a selection process, we're looking in our assessment and our hiring practices, making sure that that's also very accessible. And then, of course, rounding that up to look at our reporting and analytics. In this approach, just to kind of go over what we have done so far, in the planning stage, what we've done is we've engaged with our internal partners, such as our Employee with Disability Network, to understand the experience of people with disability. What is the major concern? What is it that they're looking for us to address right on? And we'll also be engaged with our accessibility team and our equity and diversity team to ensure that we have a holistic approach. In the attracting piece, what we've done in enhancing the branding and talent attraction on how we've go to market, we've conducted research, and by doing competitive analysis and looking at best practices, both in the public sector and in the private sector, what are the best practices and how can we adopt that for the City of Toronto? And we've also proposed a recruitment marketing plan with key focus areas and tactics to brand the City of Toronto as an employer of choice for people with disability. So how are we telling that story? And making sure that that we are representing individuals with disability in our attraction strategy. And in terms of finding and sourcing talent, what we're looking to do in this piece, what we've done is maximizing our external partnership, making sure that we are actually partnered with key partners in the community that directly work with individuals with disability, and partnering up with them not from a recruitment standpoint, but also from an awareness, from a training perspective. And also looking in the sourcing strategy, sourcing piece, in enriching the candidate experience. So one of the major concerns when we actually did work with our Employee with Disability Network and also external candidates was they felt that they want, when they do apply, there was this misconception that their resume goes into a black hole somewhere. So what are we doing to tackle that, and how are we managing our talent? In the selection piece, this is really where we're putting a lot of our effort in terms of how we assess and how we hire, and making sure that that piece is also very equitable and accessible. And we're focusing on the training opportunities, not just for our recruitment staff, but also for our people managers. So highlighting what are some key foundational trainings that would be mandatory for both the recruitment staff and hiring managers, but also making sure that we have customized training, working with community partners that specifically are representation of this community, of people with disability. And then focusing on the design and metrics, or the reporting. So how are we measuring all of that? Right now, what we're working with is a new HR system that the city just implemented, SuccessFactor. And this is actually going to give us the opportunity. SuccessFactor would give us applicant data. What we have right now, as Barb said, is internal representation, but that is not what we're looking to focus on. We're looking to see where the gaps are in the recruitment process. So are people with disability applying to the organization? If they're applying, what happens through the life cycle of the candidate? Where is it that we're getting some pain points? Is it a training for the recruitment staff that we need to focus on? Is it the hiring managers that we need to work on? So where do we see the pain point from attraction to the hire of the candidates? So far, that's a very high level of the work that we have put in place. Again, this is still very new, and this is work that is a continuous effort for us. And in terms of what we're looking to do and our strategic vision is, again, keeping in mind the talent acquisition or the candidate-centric approach that I had mentioned earlier, we're continuing to have an ongoing partnership both with our city divisions to understand what the hiring needs are, and also working very closely with our Employee with Disability Network to really understand what the employees or potential candidates' needs would be, or the candidate experience. In the attraction piece, what we're looking to do is to develop an employee value proposition. So again, really honing in on what's in it for me in terms of disclosing that you are a person with a disability, and highlighting and really working with both our divisions and our recruitment staff to create a more inclusive culture that is welcoming for individuals to disclose. We're also looking to create a social media campaign and strategy that includes employees' features and testimonials. So making sure that externally, if as a person with disability, you do see yourself represented at the City of Toronto. In terms of sourcing and maximizing our partnership, again, we have ongoing engagements with our equity and diversity and human rights team to establish new relationship with community-based diversity organization. And we're looking to enhance those partnerships and agreements to identify opportunities for individuals with disabilities, so such as career fairs, networking opportunities, really get in front of the candidate and make sure that we have direct link to the candidates. And in terms of enriching the candidate experience, we're looking to continuously leverage the relationship we have with our Employee Disability Network to identify talent acquisition champions, to attend recruitment events, and to be brand ambassadors and really tell their story from their perspective. And we're also looking to propose as a customized onboarding practice. It's one thing to attract individuals with disability, but how are we onboarding them? And what is that experience like for individuals with disability? One of the biggest concerns that Employee Disability Network did mention was around accommodation, and this is something that we're looking to simplify and to work directly with the staffing network to make sure that is addressed. In the selection piece, we're looking to provide key competency training, again, for our recruitment staff. We are the gatekeepers. So once an employee with disability applies for a job and they're going through the process, making sure that our recruitment staff is well-versed in connecting with these individuals, and of course, our people managers as well. We'll also engage with our recruitment staff and people managers in expanded and targeted training. It's one thing for us to say, hey, these are the prerequisites that we need for you to do, but from our consultation with Employee Disability Network and some of these community organizations, the point was made that we need to have more targeted training outside of our prerequisites. So we'll be focusing on that as well. And enterprise engagement in people with disability awareness and training. Going back to what Barb said, in creating this culture of, at the City of Toronto, so that people with disability do feel welcome and they do feel that they belong with us. And also rolling out one of the key items that we're working on right now, which is the Diversity Recruitment Action Plan, which is really the tacticals of how are we going to address all of the issue in the recruitment life cycle for candidates with disability. This will be a customized document, and we're working directly with our Employee Disability Network, also our Accessibility Office, to ensure that we have that lens and that those concerns are taken into place. And again, in terms of measuring our efforts and making sure that we have the right data, we're going to continue to partner with our recruitment staff and track the candidates' self-identification data. We're using success factor again and making sure that we have an understanding where the pain points are in that life cycle of our recruitment process. In terms of timelines, these are just very high-level timelines of what we're looking to do and when. So the first quarter, we're focusing on building the connections, really making sure that we have the right stakeholders at the table, socializing our action plan, and continuing to work with our Employee Disability Network and other key stakeholders. In Q2, this is when we're looking to focus on foundational training. So making sure that we hold our recruitment staff accountable and looking at who has completed this training, and then again, going further to implement the action plan that we have talked about very briefly. Q3, what we'll be focusing on is our go-to-market strategy. So building the city's brand to attract people with disability and making sure that people with disability are at the forefront of that strategy, and participating in more job fairs, networking opportunities with our key community partners for people with disability. In Q4, we're looking again to make sure that we have more targeted training specifically for our frontline staff in recruitment, our people managers, and working on creating that culture internally and destigmatizing some of the myths and misconceptions that we have around individuals with disability when it comes to talent. In terms of next step, very quickly, I'll just touch on some of these next steps.
You're going to run out of time. If you can, are you almost done?
Yeah, I'm actually almost done.
Great.
So in terms of next step, we'll look to enable hiring managers and recruitment staff, as I mentioned. We'll continue to develop key stakeholder partnership, and again, making sure that we are consulting with individuals with disability in all aspects of any of the strategies that we've developed. We'll leverage experiences of existing employees with disability and also work to create awareness enterprise-wide, working both with our equity team and also with our employee disability network. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And not to rush you, I had realized I didn't start your clock on time, so there was an extra 6 minutes earlier. But the presentation was very thorough. Are there any questions? We're going to start with Liv, and then I'm heading to Jason. Over here.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. A couple of broad questions for you. The disability and deaf communities are very diverse and contain a lot of different needs and barriers that need to be addressed. I'm wondering if there's anything specific that you're going to do to recruit and support people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And also, if anyone, it sounds like there's a great role for your current Employees with Disabilities Network to be advising. I'm wondering if that group currently includes anyone with developmental or intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, currently, actually, we are working with a specific individual in Employee Disability Network from a cognitive disability perspective. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of some of this. One of the scenarios that came to us was individuals with autism, when they're going through the interview process, making sure that our recruitment staff understand that if a person does not make the right eye contact, or the person kind of come across disengaged, how are we working with our recruitment staff to kind of make sure that we address some of those barriers? So yes, right now we are working with individuals in EDN to address some of those barriers that were mentioned.
And overall, how does your strategy address the needs of people with intellectual disabilities and developmental? Those are sometimes overlapping, but not always overlapping groups. So someone with autism certainly may have no intellectual disability, may in fact have, a real gift in that area.
I think one of the things that we know already from our work underway is that in developing our strategy and concrete actions is that it's not one particular way, that there are different targeted people and different disabilities that we need to accommodate, which means we just need to have more breadth and to the way we approach things. So, for example, the needs of those with hearing impairment is going to be very different than the needs of those with intellectual challenges. And so our actions will need to reflect that, which means we'll have subsets of strategies and actions that are focused on the different subgroups within the broad umbrella under people with disabilities. So we don't expect it to be painted all with one. That's just not going to be, that can't work.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much, Liv, for the questions. Next set of questions are coming from Jason.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a question with relation to the onboarding process and the accommodation process once individuals with disabilities are in fact hired. Have you currently undertaken, or do you plan to undertake, an internal audit of the city's technology to assess whether or not it's accessible? For example, there was a recent Toronto Star article that highlighted a gentleman that used to work for 311, and the technology changed and it was inaccessible and he had to leave his job. So I'm just wondering if there's been in your your overview of what's currently available, has there been any kind of effort to see how accessible the technology is currently and what improvements may have to be made? Thanks.
Hi, can I just have, hi, it's Alma Kinton, the city's Chief People Officer. I'm going to turn that question over to our digital accessibility team to talk about some of the work that they're doing with the city as we acquire new technology. So, but I will say just in general that we are working together with our Barbara and Halia from our recruitment team, but there's also a lot of work that's underway with our accessibility team, also working with our technology team and other divisions on ensuring that we're thinking about accessibility from every dimension to optimize our employees' experience. So that team works with divisions. In fact, on success factors, that the team has been very involved in ensuring that system, as we're onboarding it, is accessible. And our goal is accessibility by design. Beyond AODA is our goal, because one of the challenges that we have with AODA with respect to our employees is that it's very accommodation oriented, and so it's a matter of employees coming, and then if you don't have an employee in that division who using that technology, and then you hire an employee with the disability into that division, and then there's a challenge with technology. So we're trying to be more intentional, and the digital accessibility team has been very active on that. So I will just put them on the spot and ask Michael to respond.
Thanks, Ella. One thing that I'm gonna hit the nail on the head on, there's compliance and then there's accessibility. And what we strive here for at the city is to lead by example in terms of accessibility rather than just compliance. So there's two sides to our project. The first one is the public-facing side, where we aim to deliver all services. Our project has a clear scope where we are looking at our current digital assets, looking at the accessibility gaps in those assets, and then we're working with both vendors and internal development teams to close those gaps. The second piece of this is on the internal side, and we are ensuring that any net new technologies that we bring forward are accessible, and this really starts at the procurement level. So our contracts now explicitly state the city's position on accessibility for internal solutions, but as well as external solutions. So we build this in from the start, and that accessibility by design approach, where we make sure that there's checkpoints at every point in the process, right from that procurement all the way up to user testing, to make sure that we're accessible by design. As we know, the City of Toronto employees are not required to disclose their both visible or invisible disabilities. So we want to ensure that the solution that's being presented to them from a technology point of view is accessible right from the start.
Great. Thank you. And are there any further follow-up questions? Go ahead, Jason.
Are we on now? Yeah. So on the procurement side of it, is it mandated that when the city is going to purchase new technology that it must be accessible, or is that just, it would be a nice to have, or is it actually something that's
I can speak to the digital side. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. On the digital side, we're ensuring that, and let's be clear here, we're playing catch up. We've put these new procurement rules and this new procurement language in place as of June 2018. So there's still projects that are in flight that don't have it, but a lot of the vendors that we're working with are definitely working in good faith because they know they represent that true public-private partnership for the City of Toronto. But we are building in that procurement piece where we're explaining very explicit in what our city position is. So we're not saying accessible, we are being WCAG 2.0 level AA. So being very clear in our position from a city perspective.
Thank you. Next set of questions are coming from Wendy, and then Bhuvani, and then Michelle.
Hi there, thank you for the presentation. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the EDN. So the employees with I used to work in episodic disability, so that is actually the name of my old network, is the EDN, but Employees with Disabilities Network. So what is the mandate? How many people are in the network? Are they supported formally by the city, or is this something that's sort of happening off the edge of their desk?
I can answer some of those questions. So the EDN is the Employee Disability Network. It's one of several communities of inclusion that the Toronto Public Service has to support its employees, to convene with employees with similar interests, similar issues. So EDN is one of several that we have. The city will be, through our office, putting out more formal guidance in terms of reference around all these communities of inclusion. The EDN is the newest community of inclusion made available to city employees. It's 1 year young. I think we just passed its one year anniversary, December 3rd. That's right. Oh, that's right. So we'll have a lot to celebrate on December the 3rd. And because it was a new community of inclusion starting up, our office in particular lent significant resource to getting it started up. What was the other aspect of your question, Wendy? I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Oh, the number of individuals? I can't speak to the exact number, but
We don't keep that.
That's right.
Managed by the network.
It's managed by their network. They do have a formal terms of reference, and they do make a distinction of membership. So they do have steering committee members, and one of the eligibility requirements are that those members are people with disabilities, but they do have a more general membership, which does expand to include allies or people who support people with disabilities. But the actual numbers I wouldn't be able to give you.
Few follow-ups. So what is the formal relationship between the network and the city? So what are the mechanisms for the kinds of recommendations that come out of the network to be integrated into city practice or to be considered in that context?
So on our part, whenever we become aware of issues where engaging people with lived experience, particularly city employees, is an important aspect of the analysis or the work that we do, we reach out to them formally. We have a regular ongoing relationship with them. They are city employees, but beyond that, informally, our interests align greatly. So our office, when I say we, the accessibility unit, we typically advise any city division section team, one, to engage people with lived experience and consult actively to ensure that an appropriate accessibility lens has been put onto whatever analysis they're applying to a new program, policy, or service. Secondly, where there is benefit to consulting people because there's an employee focus, we actively direct them to the EDN, but they are not formally part of our office.
So just to help me clarify, so in terms of what they do, you will direct other city departments to them if you think that there's some relevance in terms of the kind of work that's being undertaken around consultation, but they don't really have a formalized role within the city.
Can I step in on that? They do. So we have, up until last year, we had a Pride network, for instance, and we had a number of employee networks that did not have a formal structure. So one of the things that we've done over the last year is providing some governance structures for the employee networks, the communities of inclusion. So the employee disability network was the one that was the most recently established one in December. So it is intended to be an employee-led and an employee-run community of inclusion, but one of the reasons why we have invested in the governance is because it is important to us as a division that we have access to people with lived experience and that we include their voice in our planning and the work that we do. So while they're not formally a part of the public service structure, that is intentional and that is by design so that it is fully employee-led, but it is our intention to consult with them and to involve them. And to the extent that, one of the benefits now of the People and Equity Division is that the equity division that supports the networks and provides governance support to oversight to the communities of inclusion is also part of the same division that includes human resources, and I lead both. And so I certainly am very committed to ensuring that they are fully integrated in our planning and in the work that we do. But also, just to speak to the question that was asked earlier, right, Liv, about people with intellectual disabilities, we are really trying to leverage external partners to make sure that we have a broad range of perspectives. So if there are community organizations that you feel like we should be connecting with, I would love to hear about them. We want to cast our net as broadly as we can. We're not trying to just be in this space. We want to lead in this space. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing is also doing pilots and other interesting things with organizations and with willing divisions. So we will be here and we'll be engaging the committee, and we really want to get this right. So the Employee Disabilities Network is going to be a critical part of our success.
You're actually out of time. You want to save it for your speech? Okay, and I just want to remind, we have three more items on the agenda, and we also have lunch. So if we can sort of speed it up a little bit. Sorry, folks. It took a bit of time on the first item. Wendy, Bhavani, and then Michelle.
Hi, so earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that one of the key areas of focus was to encourage self-identification amongst people with disabilities. I'm just wondering what that strategy looks like or what that approach looks like. Previously in the past, when I've seen job postings, what they typically have is like a one or two liner that states something along the lines of, we don't discriminate against people with disabilities. And I would argue that a statement like that is very different from something that says, we actively want you in our organization. And even those job postings that do have a statement that says, we encourage applications from people with disabilities, still would not incentivize someone to apply if they face discrimination from their employer previously.
No, absolutely. And understanding that disclosure is not something that it's something that is personal, of course, and just a blanket statement is not going to do it. So what we're looking to do is we work with our senior leaders, so making sure that we have leaders and other people within the organizations that feel comfortable enough to disclose and encourage disclosure, and really creating that environment enterprise-wide to make sure that people feel safe to say, hey, I am from this group. And that's really, this is where the attraction piece comes in, and making sure that we tell the story of individuals with disability, and we showcase individuals with disability within the city that are successful, that are thriving, and kind of making sure that we put forth what's in it for me. So it is a very personal thing to disclose, and as a person with disability, before I disclose, I want to know why. What are you going to do with that information? Who's going to use that information? How is that going to benefit me? And making sure that we're able to tell that story in a way that makes individuals with disability feel safe enough to do so.
Thank you very much, Bhavani.
Can I also add on that note that we have also worked on getting executive sponsors for all of the communities of inclusion, including the EDN, so that there is a member of the city's executive senior leadership team as an executive sponsor.
Okay, thank you very much. Next person to question is Michelle.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is around the interview part of this recruitment process. So say all goes well and someone discloses, they feel comfortable disclosing, and they come in for an interview. How are you going to have the interview questions, and particularly the scoring criteria, reflect the feedback that hopefully you've garnered from people with disabilities themselves, as well as agencies that represent folks with disabilities? So my question is how that's going to be adjusted and reflect for the fact that there's a lot of obstacles that people with disabilities face in terms of employment and education. So if you're having a quote-unquote even fair playground, it's not necessarily going to work in someone getting through the interview process. So how is life experience and unpaid labor, which comes in droves when you're living with a disability, going to actually get someone through that interview process? Thank you.
One of the work that's underway right now is the action plan. In this action plan, I didn't get an opportunity to really go into the detail, but it really does focus on all aspects of recruitment, assessment, interview, and so forth. And what we're doing in this action plan is we're creating key tangibles for recruiters and for hiring managers. So in the interview process, what we'll be doing, and this is work that's still underway, it's not work that has been developed, but what we're doing is we're looking to have input from community organizations that represent individuals with disability, and also people with lived experiences. Once we tell them, this is our process, how can we apply accessibility lens to that? And also making sure that our recruitment team has those tangible pro tips, tools, and practices in place to make sure that it is a fair process. So yes, that's still work underway, but this is something that we're working closely with people who have lived experiences and kind of telling them, this is the process that we have in place. What can we do better, and how can we fix that to make sure that it is fair and inclusive?
Thank you very much, Michelle. Anyone else to ask questions who hasn't asked a question? Miranda, please go ahead.
Thank you. This is not really a question, but I just want to thank you both for...
Do you want to save it for the speeches then?
Just a brief...
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to thank you both for your presentation, and I just want to offer an open invitation for Next Steps Employment Center to be a potential community partner to support you in your efforts. We provide diversity hiring events within communities, and we can talk further about it. Thank you. That's all.
Great. So thank you. That's a great way for us to segue right into the speaking component. Anyone to speak? Wendy, please proceed.
It looks like there's been a lot of thought put into this, and that's great. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to just mention two things. So one is that I wanted to ask some questions around the EDN to understand what kind of employee engagement you have in terms of people with disabilities. But, you know, there are a lot of people with disabilities just generally in the city workforce, too, that are probably not going to be engaged with that network. So, you know, really to consider how you're going to engage with those folks is an important question. There's a lot of talk in the strategy about recruitment, but retention is a critical piece of this, right? And so the issues, and, you know, we heard a little bit about the digital accessibility strategy piece. But, you know, as a person with a disability, and many of us here, we know that the issues that people encounter in employment as people with disabilities extend beyond just the technology piece, right? So there are issues related to privacy, there are issues related to knowledge. If your supervisor is not knowledgeable about what accommodation is, you know, what kinds of privacy considerations have to be in place, particularly, you know, for people with disabilities that are not obvious, then you can really run into some issues around those employment questions, right? So what I would encourage you to think about is how are you going to answer some of those questions around your existing employees in the city and the issues that they encounter that are related to having a disability at work here, and to prioritize those and understand how you're going to be able to solve those questions too. Digital piece is very important, but it's only part of it, right? The other piece is that, you know, there's a lot of talk in the strategy and in your presentation around disclosure, and it's something that we hear frequently here is, you know, not everybody discloses, right? So there's lots of questions around disclosure. I just want to caution you around some thinking around disclosure. So disclosure, you know, you shouldn't really be in a position of asking people just to disclose having a disability for no reason, right? And also when you're asking people to disclose, that you're not asking them to disclose a condition, right? So you're either asking them to say yes, no to a basic question on, you know, what does the demographic of our employment population look like, or you're having a conversation about accommodation, and that's a different conversation. So the other piece is, you know, the self-disclosure piece, we've heard it as being a limitation in terms of what the departments here can do in understanding what the issues are around people with disabilities in the employment context. I would encourage you to still continue to, you know, try to understand better through whatever means you come up with what the issues are for your existing employees with disabilities who, for whatever reason, have not gone through that disclosure process but exist here, because certainly, you know, informally I hear about them quite frequently. So issues around paying for accommodations, privacy, knowledge of what an appropriate accommodation looks like, that flex time can be an accommodation for people. Those are all big issues for the retention of people with disabilities. If you can get that right, people with disabilities will be more likely to also want to work here, you know? So, but thank you very much for all of the consideration in terms of the presentation. It was great.
Liv, go ahead, please.
Thank you again. I also wanted to touch a little bit around the issue of disclosure.
Liv, do you have a motion to move first?
Oh, I guess I do. Yes, I do have a motion to move. And is it going to be up on the board?
Yes, when you're ready,
Okay.
Bruce. There you go.
So I will move the following motion, that the Executive Committee request that the Director of Strategic Recruitment to provide an update to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee in the second quarter 2020 that includes information on the specific recruitment tactics that will be used with the different disability communities. So as you're digging in to give us more of that specific information, because right now we have a really broad sense.
Great. Thank you. Anything?
And can I
Yes.
return to my, okay.
Yes.
So, sorry, just some thoughts on disclosure. As someone with an invisible disability, I get to choose where and when I disclose. And a lot of that has to do with what kind of messaging overall comes from an organization, from the people I immediately work with, again, how knowledgeable they seem to be. So that's a key piece of your training, I think, is to share with your managers and your senior staff the risks around disclosure. Often people don't understand why someone might or might not disclose, and I think that's an essential piece of the training. So that there is understanding around that. I also would encourage you to take a look at the diversity and disability self-ID survey and evaluation metrics at Ryerson University under Denise O'Neill-Green, VP of Equity there. They had a really great uptake to that program, unusually so, and I think it's a real best practice case study in how to get engagement from employees in creating your diversity survey. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else to speak? Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, we have talked mainly about recruitment, but I do want to also touch on the retention piece. And I think it's important that people aren't just being brought in at the lowest level and they face kind of a glass ceiling and can't move. I think we want to create an environment where they're going to be a lifelong employee from, a young worker to retirement, and they feel they can grow with the city and they're not going to be stuck in the same position, but they actually have a real chance to move up and achieve their full potential. So I know it starts with recruitment, but I would like to also see some focus at some point on how to retain the people that you get and make sure that you keep quality people.
Thank you very much. And Michelle?
Thank you. I'll keep it quick. I just wanted to say that I'm happy to offer advice if looking for agencies to connect with in developmental services particularly, but I do want to caution that when you're working with agencies, you don't just work with folks there that are representing people with disabilities, as is often the case. Speak to the people that are connected to the agency that use the services, that live with a disability, and adjust your presentation and questions for that population. So it's going to be a little extra work up front, but there's people that are I'm happy to help you convert that into a plain language presentation and ask the right kind of questions. And I think a lot of people have just been burned in the employment process, and so you just have to be really cognizant of that. And I like the social media campaign idea. I like the idea of it being positive. So when you're speaking with agencies and people with disabilities, don't focus so much on barriers exclusively, but also, what do you have to offer? What's unique to living on the autism spectrum? What's unique to having OCD? What makes you, a valuable employee for that, with that disability? It's not just a hindrance or something you have to disclose and get accommodated for. Okay, thank you.
Michelle, thank you for those comments. Stephanie?
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. Glad that you're moving forward on this. Again, the only comment that I was thinking about is in Q4 you have that you've listed to destigmatize myths about individuals with disabilities, and I think that that's something that you can't really measure in one quarter. And I really encourage that that's something that you think about while you're creating this, because as I believe someone indicated, it's extremely important that the culture is already there, because that is going to make people want to then come to your organization, obviously, and feel included when they get there, because there's nothing worse than, as somebody indicated, if their direct manager or supervisor has still not been destigmatized or something along those lines. But just to keep it mindful that it's an ongoing process as well. It's something that a culture, all organizations have to work with over many years.
Okay. And Stephanie, thank you. Anyone else? No? I just want to add my remarks of thanks to the staff for your presentation. It is really encouraging, to be quite honest, to see all this great thinking and planning that's happening in the recruitment side of the Toronto Public Service. I think one of the learnings I've had now as the chair of this committee is that there is an incredible wealth of information and knowledge and lived experience already in the Toronto Public Service. And I think if there's a way to amplify the work that's actually happening in the EDC, regular meetings, more formal structures to support that particular network, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's right here. You don't have to go too far, and certainly you should, but there's actually quite a bit of expertise and knowledge that can guide this process and make it even better. So I want to say thank you to that. Wonderful. Okay, so we are now moving on to, yeah. Oh, sorry, we need, before you go, actually, you can go, but we do need to move the motion. I apologize for that. We have a motion on the floor. If all those in favor of Liv's motion, please indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. And of course, that report is now amended. Wanting to move along to DI 6.3, increasing the accessibility of city facilities, an overview of corporate real estate management accessibility upgrades program. And we have the team here who's been very patiently waiting since this morning, so thank you very much for coming before us. I recognize that we talked about just sort of how long the presentation would be. I'm just going to ask you folks to speed it up a little bit. I think our whole committee is going to speed everything up because the next item is actually pretty substantial, and they've been waiting a long time to present that one. Anytime you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Frank Molinari. I'm the director of the Project Management Office for Corporate Real Estate Management. I'm here with Oksana Robertson, who will be doing most of the presentation, and Joe Silvaggio, who is our our project manager, who's been working with the accessibility guidelines. We're going to present an overview and an update of the plans for the implementation and the requirements of the Accessibility for Ontarians with the Disabilities Act, or AODA, from a design and construction perspective. The information provided will contain items such as program scope and program timelines for implementation. With that, I'll turn it over to Oksana.
Thank you, Frank. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present. I'll try to be brief. For the overview, I would touch upon the background and Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines just to provide the context for the presentation for our program. As Frank mentioned, I'll talk about the program scope, approach, phases and timelines, and provide a quick update of the program and project level activities. We have only like 9 slides, and I'll try to go fast. The background is pretty obvious. Everybody in this room knows about the AODA that took effect in 2005. City Council is committed to making the city accessible. In 2009, City Council adopted and endorsed that statement of commitment, and in June of 2018, City Council adopted the City of Toronto Corporate Accessibility Policy, which gives us a framework for compliance for the city commitment to accessibility and also requirements with AODA and other city requirements. Such are the very important requirements laid out in the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines. These guidelines are intended, they actually established originally and in the newer version will continue to establish higher and more stringent requirements for accessibility for built environments and public spaces. Extensive consultations with stakeholders were conducted during the development of the original version and the updated version that will be going to council in early 2020. So our program scope is to upgrade buildings under the division's management to Toronto accessibility guidelines wherever possible. And I want to emphasize that we're working with a newer version, with the updated version, that it's not official yet, but the majority of the document, the technical portion is ready. That's what we're working with. If it's not feasible, then at a minimum, the city facilities would be upgraded to the Ontario Building Code and AODA DOBS, Design of Building Spaces. I also want to clarify that our division, Corporate Real Estate Management, doesn't maintain all city buildings. We have about 400 addresses under our management. So that's to say that not all city buildings are in our scope, but it's only the buildings that are under our division's management. But additionally, the Shelter Support and Housing Administration, they kind of solicited our help early on, and the shelters are included in our scope. Other than that, we shared our program methodology, the strategy, the supporting documents, kind of offered what we've learned so far. We shared it with other divisions and encouraged them to use it. So what's different? Previously and up till now, our division was incorporating accessibility upgrades into other innovation projects. What's different now is that the program is created that is centered around the accessibility upgrades. That's the important difference. If there are some other innovation projects or innovation work is needed, it may be considered and included with our accessibility projects. But to emphasize the difference that the program is centered around the accessibility upgrades. There are hundreds of buildings in our division's management. As I've already mentioned, there are civic centers, community centers, as I said, shelters are included, fire halls, offices, and there are many other buildings. So the projects will be, of course, we cannot do so many all at once. They will be phased, and the needs of the users will be addressed. So conducting the accessibility upgrades as a part of the program, as opposed to one by one, will also allow us to achieve three kind of very important other objectives. Saving costs through economies of scale and time efficiencies. What it means that we will take projects and group them for design and for construction. That would streamline the reviews, the design reviews, and the projects will be now released for tender, for construction in groups. Additionally to that, we all know that we will need some items we'll be buying in volumes. So have that strategy ahead of time. The hope, as we all know about economies of scale, if we need lots of push buttons for the doors or mirrors or fountains, there's an expectation that the city would be able to save money. And related to that, the second item about the consistency and standardization, that knowing that all these items would be the same, the additional benefit is the inventory management and maintenance. In terms of maintaining business continuity, and the schedule and quality metrics, it's all related to the fact that we'll be all centered, that program schedule, project schedules will be managed in kind of like together, the same quality metrics apply, the information is not lost because one centered party is looking after everything. So these are our kind of big chunks of our phases and timelines. The division already completed more than 350 audits, accessibility audits. And here I want again to emphasize that the audits were done to identify barriers against the Ontario Building Code, against the AODA DOPS, and also against the newer updated version of Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines. The procurement of the consultant services occurred already. That's for the design, program management, and contract administration. And now we're kind of in that third biggest kind of like very heavy block where we started the work for the design, the planning, basically all that work has begun. The construction is anticipated to start next year. And just as I said, the quick updates on the program level, what we have been doing over the last 2 months since the contract was awarded to the consultant. Buildings were grouped by geography and also by building type, by category. Civic center is one group, fire halls is another group, police stations. We conducted kickoff sessions with all these groups individually, collected inputs. The consultant is developing a construction strategy, a program schedule with our reviews and input. We're looking into what other projects will be happening, what real estate plans are, kind of just trying to take all of that into consideration. And we started working on the equipment specifications, as I mentioned, for high-volume items, and working on procurement documents for pre-qualifications of the general contractors. This slide, it's the last slide, looks detailed. I'm not going to walk you through all the details. The point of it is just to emphasize that in addition to all the program level stuff and planning, those first two items, the schematic designs of the first groups of projects have already begun. And that's the end of the presentation.
And thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Stephanie?
It's a very minor question, I think it is. You had just mentioned that you had worked with consultants, and I just don't have the background. I'm just wondering if they are accessibility specialists, or how did you determine who to choose? That's all.
So we had many requirements. One of them, that the firm had to be the prime consultant had to be an architectural firm, but one of the very important requirements that was written into the procurement documents that they would carry a consultant. It's either a sub-consultant or internal staff that has accessibility. It's an accessibility consultant.
Any other members with questions? No? Seeing none. I want to just thank the presenters who came before us. I really appreciate the thought that is now happening. It's almost not just the thinking about it, but it's like, intentional planning that's going into what needs to happen in order for all city facilities to be accessible. I recognize that there's a number of vendors that the city will buy services from, and they may not necessarily always be accessible. So I'm hoping that the plan as you develop is also going to extend to them and their services, and therefore if they're not accessible meeting the city's timeline and meeting the AODA at one point in time, and it's coming fast approaching, 2020 is just around the corner, is that we'll be needing to look for new service vendors as well. Not necessarily all within your direction and under your purview, but I'm just mindful of the fact that as we put in the heavy investments, and this will be like, a lot of physical construction, but we need to make sure all our partners, all the service providers, all the vendors that we buy services from are going to be just as accessible. And thank you very much once again for appearing before our committee. Great. So we are now heading into receiving another presentation. This one is long waited. This is oh, sorry, I didn't need to have a motion to receive. I didn't get enough sleep last night with a 5-month-old. Can I please have a motion to receive the report? Bhavani, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Okay. D6.4, the City of Toronto Multiple Year Accessibility Plan, 2020-2025. We're going to hear from...
It's a staff report.
Yes. So you're going to speak from here? Oh, okay. Okay, great. So then please begin.
Thank you. Yes, so we're very happy to bring this report to you, and because it's such a large piece of work, it is being presented as a staff report rather than a presentation, but I'm happy to take a few minutes to provide an introduction and overview, and I hope folks did get a chance to look it over. So the 2020 to 2025 Multi-Year Accessibility Plan, also known as MyApp, reaffirms the city's commitment to an accessible city. It includes 63 initiatives and 21 outcomes, and was informed by engagement with the public, this committee, city divisions, as well as legislative requirements. The plan goes beyond minimum compliance. As we've heard, that's a theme that we're really trying to embed in all of the different service areas. But the MyApp includes new and continuing priorities that support city staff in the ongoing identification, removal, and prevention of accessibility barriers. And I want to be clear that the MyApp does not limit the city to just those 63 initiatives that are in the plan. On the contrary, there's a new section in the plan called Guiding Principles that we spoke to you a few months back. And these principles are there to help encourage and guide staff to take additional opportunities and seek where they can improve accessibility throughout services and programs. In terms of the structure of the document, actually, it starts with an introduction, providing some background information and legislation and the city overall framework, and then goes into the 6 guiding principles, which assert our overall goals. These include leadership and accountability, dignity and independence, integration and equity, accessibility by design, innovation and adaptability, collaboration and engagement. These principles are of equal value, but I do want to say that we intentionally place leadership and accountability as the first principle, very intentionally, because we're currently working to establish a comprehensive accountability and compliance framework, and as already stated at this meeting, we want to be leaders in this area. The principal section also guides staff when MyUp might not have a specific initiative connected to somebody's or some division's work. So in addition to following all of our other policies and adhering to the city's policy on accessibility, staff should also be incorporating these principles into their projects. So then we move into the actual initiatives and outcomes. So the 63 initiatives, 21 outcomes, they're organized and aligned with the integrated accessibility standards in the AODA. So there's general accessibility, information and communication, customer service, employment, transportation, and the built environment and design of public spaces. And then there's a conclusion and also an appendix. And the appendix, so it seems like a larger document than it is. The appendix, it outlines all of the initiatives, and it lines them up with the connected outcome, as well as if there is a related standard or regulation in the AODA, as well as which divisions are accountable. In many cases, these are accountable across all divisions. There's accountabilities in all divisions. Finally, the MyUp will be reviewed and updated every 5 years, and we will be reporting annual status update reports to this committee and making those reports public in consultation with you. And we welcome your input and feedback throughout the process of implementing this plan, and want to highlight too that consultation with TAC is a very key component to the overall plan. So the staff report before you today is seeking your support so that we are in a position to seek council approval and begin to implement, to begin the work of implementation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deirdre, for the for those remarks. Are there any questions from a member regarding this particular initiative, which is significant? We've been waiting a long time for this. Yes, Stephanie, go ahead, please.
The only it's a great report, very detailed. I like the layout. Thank you for the time and effort put into this. The only question I have is with regards to when reporting to the committee. I guess is there a timeline, or is it going to be once a year? I'm just curious if that's been built in yet.
Yes, so the plan will be updated in 5 years, but there will be an annual report on where we're at with the different initiatives. So that will be every year. I would imagine it would be near the end of, so the first report would be near the end of the next year, but the actual date is not on there, but it is annual. And that will be through consultation with this committee.
So just so that, so for example, 2020 initiatives, when that timeline for 2020 is available, would that be something that would then also be presented to the committee so that we're just aware of what's moving forward before the final end 2020? I'm just wondering, somebody else wondering? Just curious about that.
Thank you for that question, Stephanie.
Hopefully, I'm going to tackle this, the question, and let me know if I've answered it. So I think what we're trying to do is pace and sequence the number of activities. As you can imagine, there's a lot of divisions to try to get together with our governance structure that Mark mentioned that we're trying to create around an accountability. So what we're envisioning is that each of the divisions, pending of course today's approval and feedback of the multi-year accessibility plan, is that each division will be undertaking an annual planning around what are they committing to for 2020. And then really what we'll be doing then through the governance structure that we're looking to create and enact is monitoring on behalf of our accessibility unit on how they're tracking against that sort of progress. And then really the idea would be then towards the end of next year, say December 2020, would be coming back to you and report back to you on what they have accomplished in that year. With that in mind, that does provide an opportunity to provide feedback in corrective in the sense that it's a 5-year plan. And so then, and keeping in mind that we're coming this year to you like in December 2019 to kind of get this process underway. So I think we'll be a lot more streamlined to figure out how we can then embed more perhaps feedback or updates to you, Stephanie, through TAC in the coming years. But I think next year would be sort of we're kind of in sync of trying to make that forward. Does that make sense?
Any other questions? Okay, questions from Wendy.
I just have one quick question. First of all, it's very impressive. This is fantastic to see, so thank you for bringing that to the committee. Throughout the plan, there are mention of 2 lenses. So there is an equity lens and an accessibility lens. And I wonder if you could speak to what those are and what that means in practice.
Sure. Wahida or Mike may want to step in, but the Equity Lens tool is an internal tool. Thanks for pointing that out, and maybe that's something we need to add some clarification on in the plan. The Equity Lens tool is a tool for city staff. So it's actually an online platform, internal, where when any staff is working on a project or initiative or policy, it's a place where they can go in and really think critically about how this might impact different equity-seeking groups, as well as like looking at the intersections. So things like, neighborhood, anything, it's just meant to really help staff create an equity impact statement. So how a specific program, and it does include in that, there is included people with disabilities and in access. So the accessibility is embedded in that equity lens tool. When we speak to accessibility lens, we're speaking more broadly, not specifically about a particular tool, but about a lens that we want to embed throughout our organization. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm really heartened to hear that people with disabilities are in the equity tool that you use. And around the accessibility lens, just, is that coming to TAC? Is that consulting with folks that have the accessibility consultants, for example?
Yeah, so the use of the term accessibility lens in the document is not a formal tool or application. It's just sort of a frame of the way we approach our work. It's not a formalized tool, except for that it is part of the equity lens tool.
If I could just add a little bit to it, so that equity lens tool in part is an effort to ensure that accessibility is embedded throughout the corporation and the city, and that every division over time builds up that capacity and builds that as their default norm in terms of any sort of development or review, rather than relying on a handful of accessibility consultants who would be overwhelmed by that demand. So it starts all of our corporate colleagues thinking about how does something that you're looking to design and propose that would be consumed by residents and visitors of the city, how would it address the needs of these various communities? And then the accessibility lens is, I would say, a more sharply focused instrument that we can bring to bear. So when a division contacts us to say, we've used the accessibility lens tool, but we're also not clear on whether we're in compliance with AODA and whether there's more we could be doing, because we've kind of reached the limit of our expertise in this field, and our accessibility lead asked us to connect with you. That's where we can bring some additional heft to that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Coming back to Stephanie for another round.
Hi, sorry, I just forgot, when it does mention all divisions, just to give me an idea, do you have an approximate number of divisions we're talking about that would actually be encompassed in that?
I think we have 44 divisions, is that? 43 now. So, and also to clarify, so it is Toronto Public Service Division, so our plan does not apply to agencies, corporations, like, for example, the TTC has their manages and maintains their own, libraries have their own, and so on.
Of course, yes. Excellent. So, good luck.
Any other questions? I've got questions regarding monitoring and evaluation, because this is a very significant body of new work. We're moving into a bit of uncharted territory. The city has tackled this issue in sometimes ad hoc ways and sometimes more structured ways. But how will this be monitored and evaluated year after year? Is there a tool that's going to be created to measure those outcomes?
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. We've already started discussions with our colleagues in the INT division about how to create either an automated or semi-automated tool that could give us more timely information about our compliance efforts overall. And the primary push for that is not only would it support all of the actions and initiatives listed under the multi-year accessibility plan, but if we really are striving for accessibility design and accessibility excellence and moving beyond compliance, it behooves us to understand where we are at any one point in time so that we can direct resources to where they're most required, rather than waiting once every 2 years for a provincial report, once every year to provide updates on the MIAP itself. So in addition to serving all of those reporting requirements, our intention is to build a tool that will have more timely information, and our hope would be no later than a quarter old in terms of the information that we have at any given period of time.
And when will that evaluation tool be created? And do we have the resources and the technical talent in-house within the Toronto Public Service to do so? Or do we need to go outside to get that information? Or is that those skills?
So we're examining all of those options currently with our colleagues in IT. There are some in-house built solutions, and we're looking at those to see whether they could be readily customized and modified for our purpose. And if so, the turnaround time for that is quite quick and the cost is negligible. Where we find that there are limitations to those tools and they don't provide the analytics and provide the visualization and the reporting function that we need to really help advance this portfolio, we would be looking at other potential procurement options.
And what does quite quick mean in city time?
I'm going to defer this over to our colleagues so that I don't misspeak.
Thank you. We look to, well, first of all, we do have a meeting set up with Mark and his team next week to start discussing this. We've actually implemented a number of these quick solutions, and so quite quick can be anywhere between 2 weeks and potentially a month. It depends, of course, on the requirements of that tool, but we are very confident, and we do work very closely with our friends and people in equity.
Okay, and then so thank you very much. So who would ultimately be responsible for the implementation of this plan, like from the public service point of view?
I think that's a great question.
Who owns it?
So at the end of the day, all the divisions own, specifically in this MIAP report, it identifies, and that's why we included the appendix, to demonstrate accountability around which divisions are taking primary accountability around some of these areas and items. But what I think is important to note is, I think, two things. One is, and hopefully I'm sequencing this appropriately, is that The governance structure that we're looking at that we are actually working towards implementing is a component of it is the monitoring and evaluation tool, which we'll be working with our IT department here with in making sure that we build that in. But the overlay of that goes up one level up is actually the part of the governance structure would be that at the executive level that we are reporting these analytics to them so that they're able to have that accountability and oversight to their respective divisions, and that we're building at the end of the day, and I think that's what Deidre alluded to at the beginning, the guiding principle of executive sponsorship, accountability, and recognizing that this is not a equity and diversity and human rights divisional or section work, that this is an actual Toronto Public Service accountability. So really we're working towards that governance structure with the layer of monitoring and evaluation along with the annual planning will then allow us to be able to track this and monitor this. Does that answer your question?
It does to some degree. Are there consequences to not meeting the deadlines and the expectations set on this report? And not just from the vantage point that people who will have less access, but is there a process where there can be course correction?
Yeah, I would say that I think that's part of the monitoring and evaluation is that if we have the analytics tool in front, dashboard per se, then we could be reporting to the executives to say, here is where you're at and course correct before we're looking at this at the end of the year. So it's really, the tool is to help not just inform us in the People and Equity Division around how the organization is doing from an oversight perspective, but is actually also to then reflect back the accountability to those divisions. In terms of what the ramifications of that is, it would have to be developed as part of the governance structure, which we're working through at this point.
And I'll just have one final question. What do you think is the biggest pitfall to this? Like, where will we fail and stumble? That we will fail and stumble along the way.
It's a good question. From where I stand, through this MyApp, as well as the governance structure that we're hoping to finalize in the coming months, it's a marked departure from how the city has been addressing issues of accessibility, which is not inconsistent with what other municipalities have been doing, which is typically a decentralized model where individual divisions or departments are reminded of their legal obligations and they report in through council, through their standing committees. What we're looking to do is establish a more formal and rigorous structure of executive leadership positions in a steering committee type of body that has more direct oversight, more timely information, and who will more formally take on those functions so that it's no longer 43 individual divisional efforts, but it's a more coordinated effort. So that is a cultural shift that I think we'll need a little bit of time to get people around that, adopt that, and really champion that, and for those executive leaders to then cascade those key messages and that new culture through the rest of their leadership.
Sorry, if I could just
thank
add
you very much.
Oh, just if I could just add one more point to that. Earlier, Councilor Warrington, you referred as part of your chair's report to the fostering diversity in the workplace. And that report, I think, kind of overlays the fact that we as an organization recognize that we're not inclusive at this point. I think that's the reality. And in that report, it identifies particularly people with disabilities as being one of the main groups that we have to create a more inclusive environment, not just in attracting that talent, but also for those that are here within the organization. So I would say to you that I think this is something, that culture change that we've been committed to at the executive level, and we're trying to sort of take on a multi-prong approach, where today you see the presentation on strategic recruitment. We're talking about culture. We've actually been even looking at our engagement scores around people with disabilities and how that is reflected in how we can create a more inclusive environment, but also looking at how we make executive buy-in and accountability accountability around that. So I think it's a progress. I wouldn't say that we're there yet, and most certainly I think we're going to have to monitor, measure, and report.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions, but Jason does. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you very much. And thanks for your very comprehensive report. It's a breath of fresh air, I must say. How do you see the upcoming discussions about the budget and having potentially a centralized accommodation fund that can be accessed by anyone in the city? How do you see that playing into or potentially assisting your strategy?
Thank you. That's a great question. That actually has been put forward as part of a budget proposal for 2020. Most certainly, I think if you refer to our recent report on fostering diversity in public service, we identified in there around people with disability, particularly around complaints and including staff, workplace complaints from staff. And so I think there's now become executive awareness around this issue, along with, as we've been looking concurrently at the equity responsive budgeting process, is actually looking at which groups might be more challenged around the budgeting process. So I think that there's definitely support at this point. It's going through the budget process.
Can I just add also just within the plan how it relates to the plan, one of the outcomes, number 16, under employment is equitable, clear. One of the outcomes that this, if we are successful, will be equitable, clear, and consistent employment and accommodation policies and procedures that seek to remove systemic barriers and ensure people with disabilities are able to participate fully as job applicants and employees. And there's other initiatives that do speak to access, to making the processes easier to access.
Any other questions? Okay, just into remarks, speeches. Who would like to speak to this? Go ahead, Wendy.
I always have something to say. It's a bit of a problem.
All right. we love hearing from you.
Congratulations. This has been a big, big job. And I know that in speaking to you, Deidre, that it's been 2 years that this has been under development, right? So well done, everybody. I am particularly heartened to see a number of things within this plan. One is accessibility by design, that you are thinking about this in the design phases, that we're not going to be repeating the old issues around, we've built it already, now we're going to have to retrofit it. So that being layered across the city and across the way that we think about accessibility is extraordinary. The piece around making sure that we are addressing the inherent dignity of people with disabilities cannot be undervalued either, right? So all of the work in here coming under the context of ensuring that people with disabilities are maintain the inherent dignity that we all have across this kind of initiative is huge too. The executive buy-in piece is fantastic, right? Because, and also the centralizing, right? The idea that there's going to be a centralized reporting initiative on this so that we know where we start and we know where we get to. That is a longstanding issue that comes to the TAC frequently, is that there is no data, right? We don't have a baseline on anything, and so we're never really sure whether we're moving forward or not. So to be able to establish that baseline and then to be able to see where we're improving and where we're not, it will be extraordinary. So well done to everybody who's been working on this. I think it's great.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll just add some remarks and also move the recommendation, which is specifically that TAC recommend that City Council adopt the City of Toronto Multi-Year Accessibility Plan 2020 to 2025, found in Appendix A. And also just to echo, based to Wendy's point, my thanks to staff for this extraordinary body of work. It really makes a difference when the service planning, when the policy shifts happen, largely utilizing people experiences. So it's actually proactive thinking, it's responding to the needs that are already out there, and to think through how do you manage the structure of Toronto Public Service and all the 43 divisions. This is a Herculean effort that is going to have to be taken, and it has to be the executive buy-in is absolutely important, but also buy-in at the director level, the general manager's level, and just keeps on going. But at the leadership level, it's critical. I think that to Jason's point is the fact that we have to debate, and even the central accessibility accommodation budget is just one great example of how things are not necessarily working as well as they can at the City of Toronto. And another one would be the fact that I know that Deidre has been running like literally off her feet, trying to respond to individual division requests around accommodations, around accessibility. What does it mean? What are their legal obligations? How do we operationalize it? And this is like one human being that's supposed to provide support and with her team, but still, like, it's one human being that's supposed to take this across the system for culture change and culture evolution. And I think that if we were really serious about this, and this is why I asked, what would be the potential pitfalls? I think some of that would be money and making sure that we actually have a division that's going to be properly resourced and financed. I know that there have been new hires. I know that there are some shifts in the sand. I'm hoping that there's going to be some significant resources allocated to make sure that the monitoring and evaluation of this MIA plan actually goes forward. Otherwise, we can have all the best intentions in the world. We've come up with some fantastic strategies at the City of Toronto, whether it's the poverty reduction strategy or the youth equity strategy, you name it, we've got strategies for just about everything, but operationalizing it to the outcomes that we want has always been probably the Achilles heel of the city. But nevertheless, we have to start somewhere, and this is a very good place to start, recognizing that there have been lessons learned from the past, which we will incorporate into the future. So thank you very much, everyone, and very well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're not supposed to applaud, but what the heck? Sometimes it really, really deserves it. So all those in favor of the motion as before us? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So we're moving on to our last item, and this is the only thing stopping us from eating, and lunch has arrived. It's item DI 6.7, International Day for Persons with Disabilities Celebration Event, and there is an update from our very own Deidre Boyle.
Hi. Okay. Thank you for all your support. And so just very briefly, there is an event we are planning. My colleague Darren is, who you'll be meeting in a few minutes. I think you know him. Is planning an event on December 3rd, a city event in the Rotunda at Metro Hall, and is inviting some people and speakers. We are EDN, the Employee Disability Network, is involved in supporting the event, and we are also inviting community organizations to participate and have vendor tables. And then there's another event that we are not leading, but we are participating in, and that is on December 7th. I think there was a flyer sent out, but there will be more information. That is being organized by community members, and that is taking place at Metro Hall on December 7th, and more information will be sent out about that. One thing that we would love to hear from members is if there are ideas for vendor tables, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and just a couple of points to add in addition to that. We typically try to align our theme with the UN's theme of the International Day, which hasn't been forthcoming. And in the absence of it, our theme or focus is about celebrating the successes of people with disabilities. And so some of the people that we have confirmed coming will be a deaf poet who will do a reading, I believe a Paralympian who will come to speak about her experience, and a couple of other that we're firming up. But I don't know whether it'll come more formally through, but we extend the invitation to all ATTAC members to attend. We'd love to see everyone there. It's a great opportunity to meet direct members of the Employee with Disability Network, and to just mark the day in a fashion that it warrants and deserves. Thank you.
Any questions?
I think that the theme is out, isn't it? The future is accessible.
There has been some comments on that, and there's been some websites and some groups adopting that, but the actual official United Nations has not released theirs. So I think other people have gone ahead and done that. That's from the research I've done.
There's an Australian-based charity called International Day for Persons with Disability who's put out a theme, and I believe their position is that in the absence of early, I think their position is that historically the UN has put out the theme too late for organizations around the world to rally around it, and in that absence, they put forward something. And some municipalities are following that lead, and we've elected not to.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Questions? Stephanie?
I think maybe it's more of a, can we move into comments?
If it's not a question and if it's a comment, we can save that till the end.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else with questions? Yeah. Just to, it is a question?
I can form it into a question.
Sure.
Go ahead. How did you decide upon who you would have as, you've identified as champions or successes of individuals with disabilities? And I'm asking because, and this is how I will get my comment in, I think that Paralympians sometimes are a nice ideal, not necessarily the reality of an average individual with a disability. I really love the idea of a poet, deaf signing poet, but I just wonder if there's a way you can identify someone who is potentially average, but still exceptional.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Anyone else? No? Okay. Just to clarify, what time is the event in the Rotunda on December 3rd?
9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m.
9 a.m. to 11:30. And what time is the event on December 7th in the Rotunda at Metro Hall?
That one I don't have in front of me. I will, but I did send something out, and I will, because we're not the lead organizers, but I can send something out.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. And anyone to speak? No? Okay. I'll just say thank you very much for putting this together. I recognize that it initiated, the initiation of it came out of TAC, but I think that we need to probably do a better job of making sure that's just embedded in the annual agenda. We talk a lot about raising the awareness of the issues, especially for around the experience and breaking through stigma. And if we actually embed it into the calendar annually, we don't have to think of it as, oh, something else that we have to add on, but it's actually something we're really excited to do every year, which we should be. With that, thank you. So we'll probably just need a motion to receive that the staff update. I'm going to say Howard, our brand new committee member. Okay, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So that pretty much brings us to the very end of our TAC agenda for today. But before we break off for lunch, I want to just, I need to move this motion that the Accessibility Advisory Committee excuse the absence of Karima Ewig, Michael Maselli, Glenn Hart, and Michael McNeely from the November 1st, 2019 TAC special meeting. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We were going to have someone join us who is Stephen Reynolds from Facilities Services, who came to the meeting on September 26th, and this is the meeting that we were not able to get off the ground. He provided an overview of fire alarm and evacuation procedures for the committee and showed members and those in the room how to evacuate in the case of an emergency or fire. He was supposed to join us today. He's not here today, but I can tell you, just to remind people, we have some new changes in the physical space of the room. One is particular viewing areas that allow for at least 4 persons using wheelchairs, and then the door that has the push-button access, the accessible push-button access, is on my left. I'm pointing to my left, which is, the building is round, so it's basically the northwest side of this room. So just to make everyone aware of that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the meeting. I just want to thank everyone and invite you all to stay. Because this is the very end of our meeting for the end of the year, I wanted to say thank you. Personally, as the chair, took a little bit of money out of my own office budget, but I'm always happy to do it every year because the work that you do is so invaluable to the City of Toronto. And I want to invite just the members to help themselves to lunch. This room is available for us. And everybody who's actually in the room staying to the very end, please join us. Okay, and thank you. Meeting adjourned.